You know that specific feeling when you boot up a new single-player campaign, and before you know it, the sun is actually coming down? Sure, there are plenty of titles that are perfectly fine to kill a random afternoon with, but I'm talking about the ones that completely hijack your brain. We are talking about games with worlds so dense and mechanics so incredibly dialed in that putting the controller down actually hurts. So today, we are running through 25 absolute essential single-player experiences that you honestly just have to play. If you genuinely want the ultimate I Am Batman simulator, Arkham City still absolutely holds the crown. Rocksteady took the tight, claustrophobic genius of Asylum and just blew the doors off, throwing you into this massive, snow-covered mega prison right in the middle of Gotham. Just the traversal alone is incredible. Getting that momentum perfectly right, stringing together dive bombs and grapple boosts over those neon-lit rooftops, it genuinely never gets old. But the real magic is the combat. The free flow system is practically a rhythm game disguised as a brawler. Once your brain clicks with the timing and you start seamlessly weaving explosive gel, counters, and those insanely crunchy takedowns into one massive, unbroken combo, you feel completely untouchable. And honestly, the open world design is so refreshing today because it actually respects your time. It gives you a dense, villain-packed sandbox without any of that modern map bloat. Every ringing payphone and side quest actually matters to the lore. Over a decade later, this remains the absolute gold standard for how to make a superhero game. Let's be completely honest about Days Gone. It had a notoriously shaky launch, but if you jump in today, especially with the newer performance patches, it is easily one of the most underappreciated open-world survival games out there. Playing as Deacon St. John in the gorgeous but brutal Pacific Northwest, the game absolutely nails the feeling of constant vulnerability. Your motorcycle is literally your lifeline, and the mechanics actually force you to care about it. You will literally find yourself cutting the engine to silently coast down hills just to save a few drops of gas, because running out of fuel in the pitch dark is an absolute death sentence. But the real star of the show here is the Horde tech. Ben's studio programmed this insane flocking AI, where hundreds of freakers pour over fences and bottleneck through the environment like a terrifying, screaming liquid. Accidentally waking up a swarm and suddenly having 500 enemies funneling toward you induces pure panic. The game definitely has a slow burn opening, but the progression curve of going from running away from 3 zombies with a broken baseball bat to actively hunting down massive swarms with proximity mines and an LMG is incredibly satisfying. Everyone remembers the exact moment they first threw the Leviathan axe and pressed triangle to call it back. The sheer heft, the screen shake, and the crunching sound design of that one mechanic alone is absolutely unbelievable. But honestly, the biggest shock of God of War returning in 2018 wasn't the action, it was the massive tonal shift. Santa Monica Studio took Kratos, a character previously defined by pure, blood-soaked Greek rage, and aged him into an exhausted, regretful father desperately trying to break the cycle. The entire game is shot in this brilliant, unbroken, single-camera take that never cuts away, which makes the journey through Midgard feel deeply personal and grounded. The combat completely ditches the old wide-angle button mashing for deliberate, over-the-shoulder brutality. You really have to manage your crowd control and positioning, carefully rotating between frost and fire damage. And Atreus is totally brilliant because he never once feels like a liability. He's actually mapped directly to your controller as an extension of your own ONIV system, stunning enemies with arrows while you go in for those massive runic attacks. Add in the Lake of Nine acting as this constantly shifting Metroidvania-style hub world that lowers its water level to organically reveal new areas, and you get an absolute masterclass in how to mature a legacy franchise. A Plague Tale: Innocence completely blindsided me when it dropped. Asobo Studio, who most people only really knew for flight simulators at the time, somehow delivered this incredibly dark, meticulously crafted stealth survival game set in the mud and misery of 14th century France. You play as Amicia, desperately trying to keep your little brother Hugo alive while dodging the terrifyingly brutal Inquisition. The tension comes entirely from how utterly vulnerable you are. You aren't some hardened warrior, you are literally just a teenager clutching a leather rock sling. But the actual star of the show is the rat swarms. The developers built custom tech to render over 5,000 of these things on screen at once, and they act like this squeaking, horrifying liquid that absolutely despises the light. The gameplay loop turns into this incredibly smart, deeply stressful puzzle system. You are constantly crafting alchemical fire to carve safe paths through the swarm, or throwing rocks to shatter a guard's lantern just to watch the rats instantly consume him. The atmosphere is impossibly grim, but the incredibly raw emotional bond between Amicia and Hugo grounds the entire nightmare. It is a tightly paced, beautiful narrative experience that completely hooks you and refuses to let go. When Ubisoft announced they were essentially making a pirate simulator wearing an Assassin's Creed trench coat, people were definitely skeptical, but Black Flag ended up delivering the absolute peak of the pirate fantasy. You play as Edward Kenway, who honestly couldn't care less about the ancient assassin and Templar conflict. He is purely in it for the gold, and that selfish swagger makes his perspective incredibly refreshing. But the absolute crown jewel of this experience is your ship, the Jackdaw. It functions as your main progression tree, and the naval combat loop is wildly addictive. Upgrading your hull, unlocking those devastating mortar strikes, and unleashing a point-blank heavy-shot broadside into a massive Spanish man-o'-war feels incredibly punchy. And the boarding mechanics are still a technical marvel. The fact that you can seamlessly let go of the wheel, swing on a rope over the churning ocean, assassinate the enemy captain, and claim all their rum and sugar without a single loading screen is absolute magic. Sure, you still have the classic land-based stealth and those infamous tailing missions, but nothing beats steering through a brutal Caribbean hurricane, dodging massive rogue waves, while your entire crew belts out sea shanties at the top of their lungs. Edward actually goes through a genuinely heartbreaking character arc by the end, but the core gameplay loop of plundering the open seas makes this an absolute must-play. Taking the punishing, claustrophobic level design of Dark Souls and stretching it across a massive open world honestly sounded like a recipe for disaster, but From Software completely nailed it with Elden Ring. Stepping out into Limgrave for the first time and seeing that massive glowing Erd tree dominating the skyline is one of those gaming moments that permanently alters your brain chemistry. The craziest part is how much the game actually trusts you. There are no cluttered UI markers or annoying compass icons telling you where the fun is. If you see a weird, jagged castle on a distant cliff, you just hop on Torrent, your incredibly clutch, double-jumping spectral horse, and actually ride there. Sure, you might get jump scared by a massive rune bear along the way, but that constant threat of death makes the discovery feel completely earned. The combat still carries that heavy, deliberate Souls weight, complete with bosses that have those painfully delayed attack animations, designed specifically to catch your panic rolls. But the absolute genius of the open-world structure is the freedom. If a boss is completely folding you at the castle gates, you can just turn around. You ride off, clear out a creepy catacomb, experiment with the wildly deep Ash of War system to completely change your weapon scaling, and come back later to absolutely demolish them. Between the organic discovery and getting accidentally teleported to the nightmarescape of Caelid by a random chest, it is an overwhelmingly massive experience that will easily consume hundreds of hours of your life. Whether you loved or hated where the narrative went, we have to talk about the sheer technical masterpiece that is The Last of Us Part 2. Naughty Dog took the survival foundation of the first game and dragged it into the most emotionally brutal, harrowing territory imaginable. Playing primarily as an older, deeply angry Ellie, the physical weight of the combat is honestly mind-blowing. The animation system alone is completely insane. They use this incredibly advanced motion matching tech, so every single time you dodge a machete swing, scramble under a rusted-out truck, or desperately craft a trap while lying prone in the tall grass, it literally looks like a pre-rendered cutscene. And the enemy AI is genuinely terrifying this time around. The human factions actually call out to each other by their first names when they find a body, and do not even get me started on the Seraphites communicating entirely through those incredibly creepy whistles in the pouring rain. Every single firefight feels completely desperate, messy, and unscripted. You are constantly improvising, shattering glass to escape a flanking maneuver, or throwing a brick at someone's face just to buy yourself 2 seconds to reload your shotgun. It is a massively heavy, emotionally draining experience that took some incredibly bold storytelling risks, but purely as a masterclass in tension, environmental detail, and raw, grounded action, there's absolutely nothing else that plays like this. If you want to pinpoint the exact moment the modern open-world formula was born, you have to look at Far Cry 3. This game literally wrote the blueprint that ended up defining the entire industry for a solid decade. You start off playing as Jason Brody, who is essentially this incredibly obnoxious, rich frat kid on a tropical vacation gone wrong, and you watch him slowly transform into a terrifying jungle predator. The progression is deeply satisfying because it is literally inked onto your character's arm through the Tatao skill tree, serving as this constant visual indicator of your power creeping up. But the real meat of the game is the tropical sandbox. This is the title that made clearing outposts an absolute art form. You can creep through the heavy brush, silently dropping pirates with brutal chain knife takedowns, or you can just post up on a ridge with a silent sniper rifle, shoot the rusty lock off a tiger cage from 200 yards away, and let a wild animal completely dismantle the camp for you. And obviously, we cannot talk about this game without bringing up Voss. Michael Mando's raw, unhinged motion capture performance single-handedly raised the bar for video game antagonists forever. Sure, the gunplay might feel a tiny bit floaty compared to modern shooters, but between the iconic villain and that legendary mission where you are aggressively torching fields with a flamethrower while Skrillex blasts at max volume, it remains an absolute blast to play. Leaving the claustrophobic dread of Rapture behind for the sun-drenched, floating utopia of Columbia was a massive swing, but BioShock Infinite absolutely nailed that transition. You play as Booker DeWitt, sent up into the clouds to wipe away a debt by rescuing a girl named Elizabeth. And look, we have to talk about Elizabeth. She is still the absolute gold standard for AI companions. She never gets stuck on geometry, she completely stays out of your line of fire, and she dynamically tosses you ammo or health exactly when you are panicking behind cover. The combat itself got a huge shot of adrenaline. You get the sky hook, which turns these massive, multi-tiered floating arenas into an absolute playground. Grinding on those magnetic rails at high speed, dropping down for a brutal melee kill, and immediately hitting a heavy hitter with a murder of crow's vigor is incredibly chaotic and smooth. Columbia looks like this pristine, hyper-saturated 1912 World's Fair, but the narrative rips away that gorgeous facade to expose some seriously brutal, unsettling themes underneath. It definitely leans way harder into pure action than the first game, but the jaw-dropping world building and that legendary brain-bending ending make it an absolute must-play. Insomniac already nailed the superhero fantasy back in 2018, but Spider-Man 2 somehow takes that foundation and injects it with pure adrenaline. Having both Peter and Miles fully playable gives the whole campaign this incredible momentum, and swapping between them across the city is literally instantaneous. But we have to talk about the traversal, because it is legitimately a masterclass in game feel. The physics of the web swinging have been dialed up to be noticeably faster, but dropping in the web wings completely changes how you read the map. Catching a slipstream in a wind tunnel and basically turning into a fighter jet as you thread the needle between skyscrapers is wildly addicting. The developers actually programmed the most mind-blowing 0-second fast travel system I have ever seen in my life, and you will literally never use it because getting around manually is just too much fun. The combat also got a massive shot in the arm. They added a dedicated parry mechanic that forces you to be way more aggressive instead of just dodging all day, and the power split is brilliant. You have Peter unleashing these incredibly brutal, heavy symbiote slams, while Miles is zipping around utilizing his evolved blue venom lightning for insane crowd control. It totally knows what kind of blockbuster thrill ride it wants to be, and it executes that vision with absolute confidence. I know we have all technically bought this game across 3 different console generations at this point, but booting up the GTA 5 single-player campaign today is a massive reality check on why Rockstar is completely untouchable. The decision to split the narrative between Michael, Franklin, and Trevor completely fixed the mid-game slump that plagues most massive sandboxes. That iconic satellite zoom-out when you switch characters is still a massive technical flex. You will literally drop in on Trevor waking up on a mountain wearing a dirty dress surrounded by complete chaos, and instantly you are entirely invested. Tying specific mechanics to each guy, like hitting Franklin's physics-defying slow-motion driving right before a fatal crash, or popping Michael's classic bullet time during a massive shootout, actually gives you a tactical reason to juggle them on the fly. But Los Santos itself is practically the fourth protagonist. The pedestrian AI, the hilarious radio stations, and the sheer density of the map mean you will head out for a main quest and accidentally blow 2 hours running from a 5-star wanted level on a stolen dirt bike. And obviously, the heists are the absolute peak of the campaign. Having to physically scope out the target, debating whether to hire the cheap getaway driver who might completely crash your bikes in the sewer tunnels, and then actually pulling off the job is pure adrenaline. Even though we all know this map like the back of our hands, the raw polish is still unbelievable. Man, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 looks at the uncompromising historical realism of the first game and completely doubles down on the madness. You are back playing as our boy Henry, and the game immediately reminds you that you are absolutely not the Dragonborn. There is zero power fantasy here. If you run headfirst into a bandit camp and just start mashing the attack button, you are going to get completely folded. The directional melee combat is incredibly heavy, deliberate, and heavily tied to managing your stamina and nailing those perfect master strikes. But the true magic of this game is the insane level of world reactivity. This isn't just a backdrop, it is a full-blown medieval simulation. If you stroll into a tavern covered in mud and blood, the locals are going to treat you like absolute garbage. You actually have to go to a bathhouse, manage your armor, and manage your reputation in every single village. The quest design completely ditches that modern glowing waypoint checklist structure, forcing you to actually investigate and solve problems organically. It is a wildly deep, unapologetically hardcore RPG that demands your patience, but once you finally master those survival systems, the immersion is completely unmatched. There is a very specific reason we all reinstall The Witcher 3 every couple of years, and it usually starts the second that wind-howling soundtrack kicks in. Stepping back into the muddy boots of Geralt of Rivia is an absolute masterclass in world building. What initially looks like a basic, straightforward monster bounty almost always spirals into something completely unhinged. CD Projekt Red absolutely refuses to give you a clean, happy ending. You are constantly forced to choose the lesser of two evils. You will lit a random piece of paper off a rotting notice board to hunt a swamp monster, and suddenly you are 2 hours deep into a genuinely heartbreaking, morally gray political storyline that fundamentally alters an entire village. The environmental diversity is staggering, too. Trotting on Roach through the miserable, war-torn swamps of Valen feels completely different from navigating the massive, corrupt streets of Novigrad, or desperately sailing a tiny wooden boat through a terrifying storm out in Skellige. And sure, people always argue that the combat can feel a little floaty, but honestly, once you get into the rhythm of researching a beast in the bestiary, applying the correct blade oil, popping a Quen shield, and perfectly pirouetting around a massive griffin, it really clicks. The writing is so razor sharp that you will log on intending to clear a single question mark on the map, and suddenly it is 4 a.m. and you are aggressively challenging a random innkeeper to a high-stakes game of Gwent. So look at Dying Light. On paper, it sounds like the most generic pitch ever, a quarantine city where you scavenge for duct tape and batteries to build weapons. But the second you actually start moving, the entire game clicks. Techland somehow managed to completely nail first-person parkour in a massive open world. Chaining a slide under a rusty pipe into a perfectly timed jump, pulling yourself up a ledge, and seamlessly drop-kicking a zombie off a 3-story tin roof is pure, unadulterated dopamine. The sense of raw kinetic momentum is totally unmatched. But what really cements this game as a classic is the day-night cycle. During the day, Harran is basically your personal playground. You are comfortably looting buildings, crafting electrified machetes, and basically bullying the slow biters. But the second that in-game watch starts beeping and the sun dips below the horizon, the genre physically shifts into pure survival horror. Suddenly, the volatiles spawn in. You are staring at your minimap, completely terrified, trying to avoid their vision cones in pitch darkness, frantically throwing UV flares over your shoulder as you sprint for the nearest safe zone. The early game melee combat leans heavily into that desperation, forcing you to manage your stamina while wildly swinging a broken gas pipe at a runner's head and constantly rotating degraded gear. Sure, the main storyline is a little rough around the edges, but the sheer adrenaline and fluid movement loop make it an absolute masterclass in open-world design. You know, a 3D platformer is an absolute masterpiece when just running the main character around an empty gray box would still be fun. Nintendo essentially built Super Mario Odyssey around that exact philosophy. The movement tech in this game is so ridiculously dialed in, locking at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second, that simply controlling Mario is a reward in itself. Chaining together a long jump, throwing Cappy, diving onto him for a mid-air bounce, and clearing a massive gap you definitely weren't supposed to cross is pure, unfiltered dopamine. And then they throw the whole capture mechanic at you. The sheer absurdity of throwing your hat on a hyper-realistic T-Rex or possessing a stack of 10 Goombas completely flips the traditional Mario formula on its head. Every single kingdom is this incredibly dense, meticulously crafted sandbox designed specifically to reward your curiosity. You see a weird glowing spot in the sand? Ground pound it. You get a power moon. You notice a tiny little ledge way off in the distance? Figure out how to parkour over there? Boom, another moon. The pacing is genuinely brilliant because it constantly hands you a brand new mechanic, lets you master it for 10 minutes, and then instantly gives you something fresh before you ever have the chance to get bored. Whether you are just casually playing through the campaign or actively trying to sweat out those brutally hard post-game platforming challenges to reach absolute completion, it is non-stop, pure Nintendo magic from start to finish. Jumping back into Aloy's boots in Horizon Forbidden West is honestly like watching Guerrilla Games flex every single muscle the Decima engine has. They took the incredible robot dinosaur hunting foundation of Zero Dawn and cranked the dial until it completely broke off. Heading out toward the Pacific coast, the sheer environmental density is actually staggering. You are pushing through these incredibly lush, overgrown jungles and diving into the beautifully flooded neon ruins of Las Vegas, and it all looks so ridiculously gorgeous that you rarely ever want to use the fast travel system. But the movement itself got a massive, much-needed upgrade. They finally opened up the climbing mechanics so you aren't exclusively hunting for those obvious strips of yellow paint anymore, and dropping in the polecaster grapple and the shield wing glider completely rewires how you navigate the map. Leaping off a massive snowy cliff and silently gliding right over a pack of roaming machines is pure bliss. The combat is where this game truly secures its identity, though. You absolutely cannot just unga-bunga your way through these encounters. It is a full-blown tactical hunting simulator. You are crouching in the tall red grass, scanning a massive slitherfang, highlighting its individual weak points, and carefully drawing a tear blast arrow to physically rip a heavy weapon right off its back so you can use it against them. Nailing that preparation phase and setting up your elemental traps before the absolute chaos kicks off is incredibly satisfying. It takes a formula we already loved and aggressively polishes every single corner of it. If we're talking about games that literally change how you view the entire medium, Red Dead Redemption 2 is standing entirely alone at the summit. Rockstar essentially built a breathing, functioning 1899 simulation that honestly demands your absolute patience. Following Arthur Morgan and watching the Vanderlinde gang slowly fracture under the crushing weight of a modernizing world is easily one of the most agonizing, beautiful character arcs ever put to screen. Roger Clark's performance is just unreal. The pacing is intentionally, almost aggressively deliberate, forcing you to physically feel the weight of every single action. You don't hit a button to magically vacuum up loot. You watch Arthur physically pat down every pocket. You actually have to sit by a fire and scrub the soot off your Schofield revolver with gun oil, or it will literally jam on you during a massive shootout. The physics engine makes every single muddy saloon brawl and horseback chase feel ridiculously crunchy and real. But the absolute magic happens in the downtime. Taking your horse up into the freezing snow of the Grizzlies, watching the mud dynamically dry and cake onto your duster coat, pouring a cup of coffee at the gang's camp, and just listening to everyone organically interact. The random encounters, like getting completely jump-scared by the night folk out in the foggy swamps of Lemoyne, have more polish than main quests in other AAA games. Yes, it is a massive slow burn, but once you let go and just allow yourself to exist in this world, it will permanently break your heart. We still need to talk about the absolute crime that was EA releasing Titanfall 2 sandwiched right between Battlefield and Call of Duty, because that release window buried what is easily one of the greatest first-person shooter campaigns ever made. Respawn Entertainment took a heavily modified Source engine and basically perfected the entire movement shooter genre. You play as a grunt named Jack Cooper, who unexpectedly gets linked to a Vanguard-class Titan named BT-7274. You honestly wouldn't expect to get emotionally attached to a giant, heavily armed walking refrigerator, but their dry, buddy cop dynamic totally carries the entire narrative. But the actual gameplay loop is where things get insane. The raw, kinetic momentum is unbelievable. Stringing together a massive wall run, seamlessly transitioning into a slide hop to preserve your speed, and hip-firing a mastiff shotgun into an enemy grunt at Mach 10 feels perfectly dialed in. And the level design is just an unbelievable flex from the developers. The whole campaign is only about 6 hours long, meaning there is zero filler. Every single mission hands you a complete line-blowing mechanic, lets you master it, and then aggressively throws it away for something new. I mean, you literally get a wrist device that lets you time travel between the past and present seamlessly, so you are actively shifting timelines mid-air just to avoid falling into fire or to flank enemies. It completely respects your time. The gunplay is wildly punchy, and by the time you hear the words Protocol 3, you will be ready to run through a concrete wall for that mech. Shadow of the Colossus is completely insane when you really think about the initial pitch. Team Ico made this incredibly brave choice to strip away absolutely all the usual video game noise. There are no cluttered UI markers, no random mob encounters, and no loot drops. It is literally just you, your glowing sword, your horse aggro, and 16 absolute walking mountains scattered across this incredibly haunting, desolate wasteland. Every single encounter is essentially a massive, high-stakes physics puzzle. You are desperately clinging to a creature's fur hundreds of feet in the air, sweating over your grit stamina circle draining in real time, while this ancient stone beast violently thrashes around trying to launch you into orbit. The sheer sense of scale is mind-blowing, especially if you play that gorgeous Blue Point remake. And the game actively makes you feel terrible about what you are doing. When you finally synced your blade into a vital spot and that soaring, epic orchestral track suddenly shifts into this deeply mournful, tragic dirge as the Colossus collapses, you seriously start questioning if you are actually the villain of the story. Add in the fact that aggro is purposefully programmed to act like a real, stubborn, living animal instead of just a motorcycle with hooves, and the immersion is unreal. The controls are heavily weighted, the pacing is aggressively slow, and it absolutely refuses to hold your hand. But if you have the patience to let that crushing atmosphere pull you in, it will completely stick with you for the rest of your life. If you want a game that will genuinely give you an anxiety attack over a dialogue prompt, Detroit Become Human is absolute peak interactive drama. Quantic Dream took their usual formula and cranked the branching narrative absolutely out of control. You are juggling the storylines of three different androids, Kara, Marcus, and Connor, in this gorgeous but incredibly tense near-future version of Detroit, where society is basically on the brink of a massive civil war. And I have to mention Connor, because his buddy cop dynamic with a grizzled android-hating detective named Hank single-handedly carries so much of the game's emotional weight. The gameplay itself isn't about traditional combat, it is pure high-stakes decision-making. You are doing crime scene investigations, executing perfectly timed button prompts during frantic chases, and sweating bullets over a timer ticking down while you desperately try to choose the right words. The craziest part is that your choices genuinely have terrifying, immediate consequences. This isn't one of those games where your decisions just change the final cutscene slightly. You can permanently get main characters killed off in the first act if you mess up a sequence, or trust the wrong person, and the story will just coldly keep moving forward without them. Seeing that massive flowchart at the end of every chapter and realizing how many completely different outcomes you totally missed is genuinely mind-blowing. If you want a heavy, incredibly polished sci-fi narrative where you actually feel the weight of your actions, this is absolutely mandatory. If we are talking about RPGs that completely throw out the rulebook, Disco Elysium is in a league entirely its own. You don't start with a sword or a magic spell. You start by arguing with your own ancient reptilian brain in a pitch-black void before waking up in a totally trashed hostel room with a massive hangover and zero memory of your own name. Oh, and there's a bloated murder victim hanging from a tree out back. The absolute wildest part is that there is zero traditional combat. Every single fight happens entirely inside your own head through dialogue and dice rolls. The skill system is basically a cast of 24 completely unhinged voices representing your fractured psyche. You'll be right in the middle of a serious murder investigation, and suddenly your electrochemistry skill will aggressively demand you go smoke a cigarette, while your Inland Empire skill insists that your horrific garish necktie is actually giving you supernatural advice. The game actively rewards you for being an absolute disaster. Rolling a critical fail on a completely basic task like trying to sneak past an old lady or sitting in a slightly uncomfortable chair can literally cause you to die of a heart attack in the first 10 minutes. It is a wildly dense, beautifully written fever dream wrapped in this gorgeous, melancholic oil painting aesthetic. Plus, you get Kim Kitsuragi, who is easily the greatest, most endlessly patient companion in video game history. If you love deep, unapologetically weird narratives that demand you read, this will completely ruin other RPGs for you. When Nintendo announced a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild using the exact same map, everybody was pretty skeptical. But then you actually drop into Tears of the Kingdom and realize they completely shattered the ceiling of what a physics engine can do, giving the player an ability like Ascend, where you can literally just swim up through hundreds of feet of solid rock to escape a cave, fundamentally breaks every traditional rule of level design, but somehow it works perfectly. The absolute madness, though, comes from Ultra Hand and Fuse. You are actively engineering your way through Hyrule now. Whether you are building a highly questionable multi-stage laser mech to completely obliterate a Bokoblin camp, or just desperately gluing a bouncy mushroom to a rusty broadsword, the game explicitly rewards your most ridiculous ideas. And the sheer verticality of the map is actually staggering. Diving off a massive sky island, plummeting straight through the surface, and falling directly into a pitch-black, gloom-infested chasm in the depths, all without a single loading screen, is a massive technical flex. The combat forces you to constantly experiment, slapping key eyeballs onto your arrows for literal aimbot, or strapping rockets to your shield to instantly gain bullet time altitude. It definitely demands a lot of tinkering from the player, but if you let your imagination run completely wild, this is easily the most brilliantly unhinged sandbox ever created. We all knew Nathan Drake wasn't actually going to stay retired and mount kitchen cabinets for the rest of his life, but Uncharted 4 handles that one last job trope with so much genuine heart. Naughty Dog basically took the cinematic DNA of the original trilogy and injected it with the mature, grounded storytelling they perfected in The Last of Us. You're playing as an older, slightly rustier Nate who gets pulled back into the hunt for Henry Avery's lost pirate treasure, and the chemistry between him and his brother Sam is just electric. But the real star here is the sheer technical wizardry. The character animations, down to the way Nate's holster shifts when he leans, or how he realistically stumbles while running over uneven rocks, make the whole thing feel incredibly tactile. They also added the grappling hook, which completely changes the flow of the platforming and combat. Suddenly, you aren't just hiding behind a waist-high crate, you're swinging across a massive chasm, snatching a rifle out of the air, and dropping into a brutal takedown from above. The set pieces are still absolutely mental. That armored car chase through the streets of Madagascar is legitimately one of the best directed action sequences in gaming history. But the game isn't afraid to just shut up and let you explore a gorgeous silent cave or a sun-drenched Italian estate. It's a perfectly paced, visually stunning send-off that sticks the landing so well it's almost hard to imagine them ever touching the series again. Hideo Kojima basically invented a walking simulator that is actually a high-stakes logistics thriller, and Death Stranding 2 takes that polarizing DNA and just makes it feel so much more confident. You're back out in those vast, hauntingly beautiful landscapes, but the sequel really respects your time a lot more by smoothing out that early game friction that turned some people off the first time. The core loop is still that weirdly addictive process of micromanaging your cargo weight, boots, and batteries, but the movement tech feels way more refined. They give you access to better traversal tools much earlier, so you aren't just stumbling over every single pebble for 10 hours. The environmental variety is a massive step up, too. Moving through these shifting, cinematic vistas makes those long, quiet halls feel way less repetitive and more like a genuine journey. It's still got that signature Kojima weirdness, with the heavy atmosphere and the occasionally baffling plot points, but the pacing is far less punishing. If the first game's methodical, meditative flow eventually won you over, this one feels like the developers fully understood what made that experience special and just polished the hell out of it. It's still one of the most unique, strangely relaxing, and visually arresting things you can play, even if you're technically just a glorified future delivery guy. You have to check out Claire Obscure Expedition 33 because it's doing something with turn-based RPGs that feels incredibly fresh. The hook is genuinely haunting. Every year, this supernatural paintress wakes up, paints a number on a monolith, and every single person of that age just instantly turns to smoke. You're playing as a group of explorers on the 33rd expedition, desperately trying to kill her before the count hits 33 and wipes you all out. It's got this high-stakes ticking clock energy that makes the narrative feel so much more urgent than your typical save-the-world quest. But the real genius is the combat system. It's technically turn-based, but it's got these reactive mechanics that mean you are never just sitting there watching animations. You have to actually time your parries and dodges in real time to completely negate damage, almost like a rhythm game mixed with a high-end brawler. If you're frame perfect, you can even counterattack during the enemy's turn, which keeps you constantly lean forward in your seat. The art direction is this stunning, surrealist take on Belle Epoque's France mixed with dark fantasy, and everything from the monster designs to the spell effects looks absolutely top tier. It's the perfect middle ground if you love the tactical depth of a classic RPG, but want the visceral, don't blink intensity of an action game. Black Myth Wukong is basically what happens when you take the legendary Journey to the West mythology and filter it through some of the most intense, high fidelity action combat we've seen in years. You're playing as the Destined One, and right from the jump, the game makes it clear this isn't just another button masher. It definitely draws from that Souls-like DNA, but the pace is way more aggressive. You're constantly dancing around enemies with these frame-perfect dodges that leave behind afterimages, building up your focus points just to unleash a massive cinematic staff slam. The boss variety is actually insane. You'll be fighting everything from giant fire-breathing bears to lightning-fast spearmasters, and every single one feels like a genuine spectacle. But the real X factor is the spell and transformation system. Being able to mid-fight turn into a flaming wolf or a stone golem completely changes your tactical options and gives the combat this incredible flow that most action RPGs just can't touch. Visually, the game is an absolute powerhouse. The Unreal Engine 5 environments are so dense with detail, and the creature designs feel like they stepped straight out of ancient Chinese folklore. It's a demanding experience that expects you to learn every parry and every opening, but when you finally nail a transformation combo and take down a massive boss, the payoff is just immense. And that pretty much does it for our list. If you found some new gems to add to your backlog, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives and gaming breakdowns. Thanks so much for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.